Yá'át'ééh, or actually not abiní. Good morning, or hello, my relatives. It's not morning anymore, at least here on the East Coast. It is just after 12. But Yá'át'ééh, it's good to be with you. I'm grateful you can join me for my second cup of coffee. Today, I want to have a discussion about the 2024 presidential campaigns and just catch up a little bit on what's going on in the campaigns, what's coming up in the next few weeks, and yeah, just have a discussion about what's going on in 2024 presidential politics. But before I begin, I want to do like I always do, which is acknowledge I'm speaking to you from Piscataway lands. I moved here with my family about almost 10 years ago from the Navajo Nation. And these lands, which are now known as Washington, D.C., are traditionally the lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the lands where I'm living, where I'm moving, where I'm breathing, where I'm living with my family. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. Well, my relatives, and I see George Yá'át'ééh, good to be here. Thanks for joining. Jermaine Yá'át'ééh, thanks for being here. It's good to have both of you with me. I know there's others who are joining and are on right now, but I spent some time this morning catching up on the campaigns of Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Robert Kennedy, Cornel West, and Jill Stein. And also reading about the CNN presidential debate that is happening next week on June 27th. And I wanted just to touch base a little bit on some of these campaigns, talk about what's going on, and let's see where that takes us. But anyway, to start, I'm just going to share with you, and so these are the four. There's really, I mean, if you look at the tracking data, and we're going to look at that a little bit later, there's really only two people running right now. There's Joe Biden and there's Donald Trump. There are others who are getting some coverage in the news. Robert Kennedy's getting some coverage. Cornel West is getting a little bit of coverage. Jill Stein's getting even less coverage. But they're all running. We're going to talk about their campaigns. But I just shared a link to you on NBC News. It just shows those five candidates and kind of what's going on within their campaigns. That page was updated a few weeks ago. So I don't think it has Donald Trump's, or doesn't have some of the latest VP candidates in there. But anyway, it does have, has some information going on about each of those campaigns. What got me interested in talking about this again is I ran across an article yesterday that Donald Trump, super PAC supporting Donald Trump, received one of the largest donation of this presidential season. It was a $50 million donation given to a super PAC by a fairly reclusive billionaire. And interestingly enough, I actually forget the name of the billionaire right now. I was reading the articles about him. But he's been supporting both Robert Kennedy and Donald Trump. He's given up to about $20 million to Robert Kennedy. And then just in the last day of the previous reporting cycle, last day of May, he donated $50 million to a super PAC supporting Donald Trump. And it just is mind-boggling that the tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars that are being invested into this election, into these campaigns. And as someone who ran in 2024, right, or in 2020, sorry, it is literally mind-boggling to me how much money is being spent on this and how that absolutely creates an uneven playing field. It is so incredibly difficult to get, not only to get your voice out there, but to get the media to cover you when you're running outside of the two-party system. And it's not even that they just don't want to travel to come hear you speak or see your events. I mean, there were numerous times where I was at events with other candidates, And the media, the national mainstream media, literally would write me out of events. They would exclude my name from even participating in events where they were at and I was there. And we called them one time and said, my press person called them and said, "Hey, why can you correct your story and add Mark into the story? He was there for both days of the event." And they said, "No, we can't do that. We only cover Democrats and Republicans." And so, right. So anyway, so the challenge of even making the news as a third party independent candidate is really, really challenging. And that's clear. Even if I just spent some time these last few hours Googling Jill Stein, Googling Cornel West, Googling even Robert Kennedy. And for both Trump and Biden, there's countless stories written every day about their antics and their campaigns. And for these other three candidates, there's maybe one story in the past week that's written by any sort of news agency of any weight, and they're just not being mentioned hardly at all in the campaigns. So I want to share a few stories. The one I shared with you, again, this is just the antics of the two parties, Biden and Trump, where Trump has outraised, at least in May, outraised Biden in the campaigning fundraising arena. And that is even after his felony convictions. And there's several points in these stories that are just saying, like, Donald Trump is literally rewriting politics, where in the past, the felony conviction would have ended a campaign. And with Donald Trump, it's literally just invigorating it. And so anyway, I shared that article with you from AP News. I'm also going to share this article because a lot of the stories written about the other candidates were about this, which is on June 27th. There's going to be a CNN presidential debate. And to qualify for the debate, you have to be on the ballot in states where the total number of delegates from those states equals 270, the number to win the election. And so you have to be on the ballot on those numbers of states. And you also have to have been polling at more than 15% in at least 4 major national polls. And none of the candidates of the third party candidates have qualified. Robert Kennedy hasn't qualified that way. Cornel West hasn't qualified, nor has Jill Stein. And they've all, I think Robert Kennedy is filing a lawsuit suing CNN. Jill Stein has filed a grievance with the FEC, I believe, about her exclusion from the debates. But anyway, so that is what is setting up who's going to be actually on the debate for CNN next week. And it is going to just be Trump and Biden. We'll talk a little bit more about that debate later. But here I'm going to share a story about Robert Kennedy Jr. And this just goes in, and I'm just sharing this so you can take some time to read these if you want. This is how he failed to qualify in the CNN debate. And then there's a lot of other interesting stories, and this is about also about Robert Kennedy and Politico and how his campaign is really burning through cash right now. And he has been done the best fundraising, even more than Cornel West or Jill Stein, as an independent candidate. He has gotten more support. Again, there's one person who's given at least $20 million to support his campaign. And he's been able to raise a lot more. And he's on the ballot in several states and has said he's collected enough signatures to be on the ballot in many states, but that hasn't fully been certified yet. And this is someone coming from the Kennedy family, right? So, of course, if he's having trouble getting out as an independent candidate, of course, others are going to have even a harder time with that. And then here's one of the few stories I could find about Cornel West written recently. There were several stories written a few months ago, but I could not find a whole lot of stories written recently. And I found this one on NBC News, where they did some digging and found that there were operatives with GOP ties who are helping Cornel West get on the ballot in North Carolina, I believe is the state they're trying to get him on the ballot in. And it was talking about how there are 2 or 3 operatives from a right-leaning Republican political group that has been working to try and get Cornel West on the ballot, and literally using the fact that telling people there's one story of them actually collecting signatures at a Trump event so that they could kind of disperse the support for Biden among other left-leaning candidates, and then hopefully solidify support for Trump by having more people on the ballot who are left-leaning. And of course, most of the independent candidates, although Robert Kennedy has some both right, he has probably the best chance of at least siphoning a few votes off from the right. Jill Stein and Cornel West are only going to take votes from the left. And so, yeah, that was an interesting story. But that was one of the few stories I could find written about Cornel West in the past few weeks. There's just not a lot being written about him recently. And then the same thing was very true for Jill Stein, right? She filed a complaint against the election debate because she was excluded from the debate, and she thinks all candidates should have a chance to be on the debate stage. And that was one of the few stories I could find about her recently. And so, so that's some of the stories that I've been able to find about that. Russell Gallman wrote, yes, Marianne Williamson was completely blacked out, and yeah, she did not get much coverage either. And so there's obviously the media works with the two-party system establishment to really highlight the main candidates and really marginalize or dismiss those who are coming from the third party or independent spaces. But anyway, I wanted to also show you some polling data, and this is from RealClear polling. And this was just an article that was referenced in one of the articles I was reading. And I just want to show you one graphic from this that just kind of gives you a sense of where all the other candidates are at in this race, where this is going back to the early days of 2024. And you can see up here, you have Donald Trump and then Joe Biden, and they're polling in the 30s and 40s. And of course, Joe Biden has been gaining on Trump lately, especially after his felony convictions. And they're fairly close right now. There's actually a lot of polls that have Joe Biden higher than Trump. And then you have in the middle here, kind of losing support slowly, is Robert Kennedy, who is down here anywhere between 10 and 15%, even dipping most recently below 10%. And he's been losing traction, especially as we get closer to the actual election. And then below 5%, really polling most of the time at around 1 or 2%, we have Jill Stein and Cornel West, who are polling way down here. And yeah, they're both having a lot of challenges getting both media coverage as well as getting the signatures needed to get on the ballot in a lot of states or to get attention drawn to their campaigns. And so this is what the 2024 election looks like right now. Now, I know one of the biggest debates every election, and this is what the Democrats really do, right? Democrats, if you look at the elections, and I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, right? The two parties play kind of different roles in subverting democracy. Generally, the GOP doesn't like voters. The less people who vote, the more likely their candidate is to win. And so they're about trying to keep people from voting or keep people from being able to poll and to get to the ballot box. And so they're all about limiting voters as their way of supporting GOP candidates. The Democrats are more about, they don't like competition. And so, right, most years, this year is not a good example, but in 2020, they had one of the most diverse group of candidates running during the primaries. They have more women, more members of LGBTQ, more people of color running. And then they decided on the most status quo, right, middle of the road, white landowning male they could find, which was Joe Biden. And so, and the Democrats have a much more diverse group of supporters and people who are enrolled as Democrats. And so that generates a lot of interest when they have a diverse group of people running in the primary. But then when they settle on their white landowning male that they actually want to run for president, now they're afraid that if there's other candidates running who look more or reflect more the demographics of their actual supporters, that they're going to vote for them. So the Democrats actually work very hard to keep third-party independent candidates out of the media and off of the stage. They're very afraid. The Libertarian Party actually takes more right-leaning votes than the Green Party does. But the right doesn't scream and yell about the Libertarian Party, even though they're better funded, they're better organized than the Green Party ever has been, and get more votes than they do. But the Democrats cry and scream and file lawsuits about the Green Party and other independent candidates. And the Republicans actually work to support those candidates because they know the Democrats hate competition. But the challenge is, right, and I think this is where Robert Kennedy is interesting, because if you're really going to win as an independent, if you're going to actually win an election, not just be a spoiler for either the left or the right, but actually if you want to have a chance of actually winning an election, you need to be able to take votes to, not even, I'm going to say take votes because it's not the left or the right's votes, right? You need to be able to appeal to voters on both the left and the right side. And Jill Biden and Cornel West do not appeal to voters on the right side of the aisle. Robert Kennedy actually does appeal to some voters on the right side of the aisle. Not a lot, but he does have some. So I actually think I would have loved to have Cornel West run in the Democratic primary and force Biden to fight for the support of people of color. I think he would have had a much greater success had he ran a hardcore primary challenge to Biden in the primary season. I think that would have been a great way for him to get his name out there because he is largely a left-leaning candidate. He is not going to take votes very much from the right, and so he is appealing to left-leaning voters. And I think Cornel West would have been much better served to run in the Democratic primary and force Biden to campaign for votes from people of color and other people who are in the margins. Running as first a Green Party candidate and then now as an independent, right? He's a left-leaning candidate who's only going to take votes from the left. And if you want to win as an independent third-party candidate, you have to be able to appeal to voters from both sides of the aisle. One of the largest parties, right? The largest affiliation politically is the independent voter. It's not that people don't lean left or right. It's that they don't want to make up their mind too far in advance. And so there's a lot of people who are kind of standing back, independent voters, or who want to at least be a little more open-minded, who are going to really kind of play the field a bit more. And you don't hear their voices much during the primary season. And of course, Jill Stein and the Green Party, they only appeal to left-leaning voters. So this is why when I ran in 2020, I ran as an independent candidate, and I actually worked to campaign to right-leaning voters. And I if I were to run again, right? Or let's say if I had that 2020 campaign to run over again, to redo that campaign, I would actually work harder to speak more directly to right-leaning voters. When I did my book tour for Unsealing Truths a couple years ago, some of the most well-attended events that I had were in hardcore Republican cities and states like Iowa. And I was able to talk very directly, especially when I knew I was going to be talking to a right-leaning audience regarding my book. I was able to talk much more directly to them and even rebuke them for some of the things that they're doing when I knew that was who was going to be in my audience. And so I think if I had that 2020 campaign to do over again, I would actually speak more directly than I did at various points in that campaign to the right-leaning voter and talk to them more directly. But anyway, that's in the past. So I was kind of interesting to watch that, to see that polling data, right? And to see how, we absolutely have this race, like we almost all the time have. We have the two from the major parties up top. We have one strong independent in the middle, but again, losing support and not doing very well. And then we have the two left-leaning candidates who are not even polling at all right now, very much, well below 2% in most of the polls. So what does that mean for doing? How do we even think about being active in this 2024 campaign? I mean, I'm still trying to figure this out, right? This is still something I'm trying to think through. I want to talk a little bit more about this CNN debate that's coming up. And I'm absolutely going to watch it. And I want to tell you why I'm going to watch it. I'm sharing a story here. This is from the Washington Post. It actually mentioned this in the other story I shared up above from AP News about how Trump and Biden are preparing differently for this debate. But this debate has some very interesting ground rules, which, if I were debating Donald Trump, these are some of the ground rules I would absolutely dream about having with Donald Trump. I don't know how the Democrats got these rules in place. I'm assuming they're the ones advocating for them. I couldn't imagine Donald Trump's and the Republican Party having any ever advocating for these types of rules. But some of the rules for this campaign, I already told you about what you need to qualify. That's just to qualify to get in. But this debate will not be filmed in front of a live studio audience. There will only be the candidates on the stage with the moderators there. There will not be a live audience. When the question is asked, when one candidate is speaking, the other candidate's mic will be muted. They will not be allowed to bring in any props or pre-written notes. They'll be given a bottle of water, a pen, and a pad of paper. That's all they get. And right, I think these rules, in my opinion, absolutely favor Joe Biden. By taking away a live audience, Trump plays to an audience all the time, right? He is always playing to the audience that he's in front of. And they cheer and they scream and they holler and they support him. And even when he says some of the craziest things, they're clapping and applauding him, and he just keeps rambling on and on and on. Trump does not speak very well. He's great to fire up an audience, but he's not articulate. He doesn't think deeply. He's not intellectually curious. And by taking away the live audience from this debate, that I'm going to watch this debate very closely, because that has to favor Joe Biden. I have no clue. Maybe if CNN mandated this, or if the Trump team just kind of lost their minds and forgot who their candidate was and thought this would be a good way to go about doing this campaign. I have no idea. But debating Donald Trump in a empty studio, this could potentially be very entertaining. And so I actually am curious to watch it. And then to take away all their props, right? All they get is a pen, a pad of paper, or a pencil, a pad of paper, and a bottle of water. That's all they get. And their mics will be muted when they're not speaking. I'm definitely going to watch this debate. So, yeah, it's June 27th coming up next week. It's going to be on CNN. I don't have all the times or when actually it's going to be in the evening. I'm assuming it's going to be in the evening. But it's definitely going to be worth watching, I think. And then this is the only debate until September. Then the next debate is not until the month of September. And so there's going to be a long time over the summer when the conventions happen and all these other things happen. They talked about how this is one of the earliest debates they've ever had during the general election. And it's, I think, the first debate since 1976, I believe, that doesn't have a live audience. And this debate is actually going to have commercial breaks. Most presidential debates don't have commercial breaks, but there's going to be 2 commercial breaks during this debate. So anyway, it should definitely be interesting. But yeah, so that's kind of my catch up on this. Their policies, right? They're all over the map. If you go back to that first page, where I showed just tracking the different candidates. They talk about some of the policies that they're advocating for, and that was kind of interesting to read. But this. You rarely hear them, at least the media rarely covers them talking about their policies. Mostly we just hear about them the way they attack each other and the way they scream at each other, especially between Trump and Biden. So anyway, this is the 2024 election. Wanted to take a little time just to catch up. I did some reading, have a fairly, at least more caught up understanding of what the different candidates are doing. If there's other third-party candidates out there that you know of who are saying some interesting things, or doing something interesting, I'd love to hear about them. I'm going to continue watching Cornel West. I'm going to continue watching Jill Stein. I'm going to continue watching Robert Kennedy. As you know, I am never very happy with the Democrats or the Republicans. They are pretty much just a version of good cop, bad cop when it comes to politics. Both of them are not about living in a true democratic society. And so I'm very curious to see what other third-party candidates emerge during this next part of the campaign. But anyway, my relatives, I hope you found this helpful. I hope I gave you a few resources that you can use to catch up on what's going on in politics right now. If you like what I'm doing, if you appreciate the perspective I try to bring and the conversation I have, I work very hard to keep my voice independent. And because of that, I don't monetize my podcast. I don't monetize my YouTube channel. I don't get any money from advertisers. I know YouTube does play advertisements on some of my videos, but I have not monetized it, so I don't gain anything from that. And I do that because I don't want to give advertisers any influence whatsoever over what I say or do not say on my podcast and on my platform. And so if you like what I'm doing, if you like the work that I'm invested in, one of the great ways to support my work is to subscribe to me on Patreon. And there's several tiers that we have. We have the most popular tier is called the Ask Questions tier, where once a month I have an open Q&A, and that's going to happen next week. I'll have an open Q&A where you can jump on and we can have a Q&A on my Patreon site. It's actually on a Zoom call. And I really love those times every month to just kind of touch base with people and go through questions that come up, whether they're in my podcast or something I've written for my book or something I said when I was speaking or just my perspective on something going on in the world. But yeah, it's a great place to kind of catch up and touch base with people. And if you haven't read my book, Unselling Truths, yet, I always encourage you can buy it anywhere books are sold. But if you want to get a signed copy of it, you can buy signed copies from my website at wirelesshogan.com. My relatives, I'm grateful for all of you. Thank you for joining me today. Mary, Yá'át'ééh, good to see you here. Debbie, Yá'át'ééh. Oscar, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for being here. Ted, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for being here. I appreciate everyone who's taken some time and for joining me for my second cup of coffee. I hope your second cup is as good as mine is. But yeah, my relatives, walk in beauty. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.